Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 11-game MLB DFS slate over on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. It's going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players. And cover other sports as well. We have NASCAR going on currently. We have the NBA coming back soon. We have the NFL in the fall. So there's a lot to look forward to. It's going to be a very busy time, but it's also going to be a very fun time, and I'm extremely excited, and I'm sure you guys are as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. And if you want to follow me over on Twitter, I'm at ChrisPennell16. If you want to follow me on IG, I'm at CPen16. And if you want to support content over on Patreon, that's always much appreciated. We have near 350 members now, which is incredible. I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys. You guys get access to all the extra content that I put out. So if you guys are interested, links in the description below. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. And I do want to start this video off by saying I am recording this video the night prior to the slate. So if anything drastic changes, I do apologize. But since the slate locks at 1 o'clock, I did want to try to get this video out earlier than I usually do. So as the night prior, hopefully nothing changes too much. But as of right now, this is kind of the player pool that I am looking at. So let's start up top. We have Zack Greinke. He comes in at 10,900. Now, he's not my most favorite spend-up option, but I do think he's pretty safe here versus the Mariners, who just don't have the greatest lineup in the world. And again, the Astros are going to be a heavy favorite, so Greinke is in a good spot for a win here. Over in Vegas, he's got a 76% chance for a win. 3.13 implied team total against him, which is, I believe, the lowest on the slate. Now, there's a couple of totals that are not out yet, but it would not surprise me if Greinke has the lowest implied team total against him, if not at least top 3. But his numbers were solid last season. Now, he's not a high strikeout pitcher. He's more of a control guy and limits hard contact. But as you're going to see, only in Vegas, he's got a 5.5 K prop compared to 7 for Bauer, 6 for Carrasco. But nonetheless, he is a pretty safe option. If you're looking at his numbers last season, he had an ERA below 3, a 3.74 xFIP. Now, only a 23% strikeout rate, which if I'm paying a near 11 K for a guy, I want strikeouts. But he is still a safe option here. Now, Trevor Bauer is my preferred SP1 in this slate, but I still like Greinke. I would not be opposed to it. He's got a 4% walk rate, gets a high ground ball rate, only a 36.2% hard contact rate, and less than 1 home run per 9 innings. I mean, he's just a safe, solid pitcher. He limits the hard contact, and he usually gets the job done. He's pitching for a great team. They should be able to pick him up a win. I think Zack Greinke is pretty darn safe here. It's just I like the strikeout upside with other pitchers better, but I mean, looking at the splits versus righties last season for the Mariners, they had one of the highest strikeout rates in the league at 25.7%. Near 200 ISO, 316 WOBA, 100 WRC+. Plus. They did have some pop last season versus righties, but Greinke's a guy that's going to limit the hard contact, and I think he's going to be just fine here. So Zack Greinke is a very safe, solid option, but I do like the upside with Trevor Bauer more. Now, he's my preferred SP1 in the slate, and I do think he's going to carry a lot of ownership tomorrow, but I do think it's for good reason. I love the upside here versus Detroit, one of the worst teams in the league versus right-handed pitching. Last year, whenever there was a righty versus Detroit and they were at least had decent talent, I was always interested. And Trevor Bauer's got, top-level talent. Now, at times he does struggle where he looks pretty average, but he has those games where he just looks absolutely incredible. He'll go 7, 8+ innings, 10+ strikeouts. Now, I'm not expecting him to go that deep into the game considering, this is the first start of the season. But Trevor Bauer was a guy that had a long leash, like one of the longest leashes. I actually believe he was averaging the most pitches per start last year, if I remember correctly. But I'm obviously not expecting him to go like 115 pitches here, but I think we can at least get 6 innings out of him, maybe 7 if he's pitching efficient. And he can certainly rack up the strikeouts here versus Detroit. If you're looking last season at his numbers, he had a 28% strikeout rate, now a 9% walk rate, which can get him into trouble sometimes, but still overall I think his numbers are very good. And if you're looking at Detroit splits versus righties last season, they were absolutely horrendous. A near 27% strikeout rate, only a 150 team ISO, a 73 WRC+. These are some of the worst numbers in the league. So Trevor Bauer, he checks all the boxes for me, and I think Cincy can get him a win. I think Cincy's one of the better stacks on the slate, especially one of the top value stacks. So Trevor Bauer's in a really good position for me, and he is my preferred SP1 on this slate if you're spending up. Now going down to Carlos Carrasco, he's 8,600, and I think he's a pretty safe, solid option here. Now, the Royals do not have a confirmed starter yet. I think it's either going to be Mike Montgomery or Jorge Lopez. Either way, Carlos Carrasco should end up being a heavy favorite in Vegas, and they should be able to pick him up the win. And his numbers last season, don't forget, he was only, I think he only started 12 games, 12 or 13 games. He appeared in, I believe he had 80 innings pitched. Now, he has a pretty big split between his ERA and xFIP, and it just goes to show he got a little bit unlucky last season. He had a 5.3 ERA, but a 3.5 xFIP, which is actually very good. That was better than Granky. That was better than Trevor Bauer. Now, it was a much smaller sample size at only 80 innings compared to guys like Granky and Bauer. Apologize, I had to pause the video really quick, so I forgot exactly where I left off. But I was talking about Carrasco, and this is just a pretty good matchup versus the Royals. Now, I don't think he's going to do what Shane Bieber did, where he just came out through 14 strikeouts, but it's still a solid matchup nonetheless, and they really don't have too many lefties that concern me. You have Mondesi, Alex Gordon, but he's only projected to see 3 lefties in the lineup currently, and I think he should be able to have his way. If you're looking at their splits versus righties last season, they didn't strike out a ton at only 22%, but they were just overall a pretty weak team. Only an 86 WRC plus, 300 WOBA, 157 ISO, so I think it's a pretty safe spot for Carrasco. I like the price tag 8,600. If you want to make him your SP2, I get that. There's a ton of value on this slate. I have not tried to make lineups, but I'm not advocating this, but I think if you wanted to play Granky and Bauer together, I think you could easily do it. I mean, there's a lot of value in really good spots on this slate, so I don't think spending up for pitching is going to be any issue. But if you want to go down with Carrasco as your SP2, I actually think that's a really safe, solid option. I think a lot of people might go down to Vince Velazquez and Kyle Freeland, but Carrasco, he's in a pretty good spot for me. Now, dumpster diving a bit, we have Vince Velazquez and Kyle Freeland. We'll start with Vince Velazquez, and this guy is a complete wild card anytime he's on the mound. The guy has upside. I'll never forget that 16 strikeout game he had a few years ago. I mean, I forget exactly what game it was, but man, the guy has upside, but he also has a ton of downside. And the only reason he's on here is because he's facing the Marlins, and anytime a pitcher is facing the Marlins, you should have interest because they are overall one of the weakest teams in the entire league, and they were pretty rough versus right-handed pitching last season. But if we're looking at Vince's numbers, he had a near 5 ERA, a near 5 xFIP, but he does have a 25% strikeout rate, which does give me some interest. But man, he just gives up a ton of power, a ton of hard contact. I mean, he has a 44% fly ball rate, 47.5% hard contact rate, nearly 2 home runs per 9 innings. But man, it's just the matchup versus the Marlins. He's 6,900. I mean, you can expect him to give up a run or two, but if he can keep the Marlins contained here and just get maybe 5 to 6 strikeouts, maybe even 7, I don't know. If he's feeling it, maybe more. But if he can just give up a few runs, maybe the Phillies get him the win here and he pitches decently well, I think he'll pay off that price tag at 6,900. And if you're looking at the Marlins splits last season versus righties, 25% strikeout rate, only a 124 team ISO, a 75 WRC plus. Those are pretty pitiful numbers. So the matchup's good for Velazquez, but the guy is a complete wild card. He is hard to trust, but I do like the matchup versus Miami. And if you want to get downright dirty, you have Kyle Freeland here at 4,700. He's probably going to grade out pretty well in projections as a value because, look, he's dirt cheap. But man, he is not the best pitcher in the world. I mean, if you're looking at his numbers last season, 7 ERA, 507 xFIP, 17% strikeout rate. Now, yes, he does pitch in Coors Field half the time, but still, the numbers are just not great for Kyle Freeland. He's got a 5-run implied team total against him, 42% chance for the win, only 4.5 strikeouts. But at 4,700, you don't need to do much, and he actually has okay splits versus lefties. Now, his numbers versus righties are just downright terrible. I mean, 15% strikeout rate, near 300 ISO, near 400 WOBA. If we go to the lefties, 155 ISO, 23% strikeout rate, 331 WOBA. It's respectable. He's going to see some lefties in this lineup. Shin-Soo Choo, Joey Gallo. Actually, some of their best hitters are lefties in Gallo and Shin-Soo Choo. So that's obviously going to help him a little bit. If you're looking at the Texas Rangers splits versus lefties last season, they had over a 26% strikeout rate versus lefties. Over a 26 strikeout percent versus lefties. 203 ISO. They do have pop. I mean, Rougned Odor is a lefty. He can also hit lefties well, but still Kyle Freeland is better versus lefties. So it's probably going to be boom it's probably going to be bust or half boom for Kyle Freeland here. I'm not expecting much, but if he can get us double-digit points, I think he'll feel pretty good about it. If you want to use Bauer with Kyle Freeland, you're going to be able to do whatever the heck you want with bats. So that's the only reason you're playing Freeland is if you want to spend up for stacks, but really for the most part, there's a ton of value on this slate, so I really don't think it's that necessary, but it's a somewhat okay spot for Freeland, and Texas is not a hitter's paradise anymore, so that'll obviously work in his favor as well. But that's pretty much all I want to talk about for pitching. There's a couple of other options on the slate, but as of right now, those are the kind of guys I am most likely going to end up using. So now we're going to go to the bats. And again, if you're new to the channel, what I like to do is I like to go position by position. I pretty much just go down the DraftKings list. I look at people that, hey, there's some good matchups. I can, I want to talk about them. I throw them in here. We go in order by price, and we're going to quick hit them. I have a ton of players listed here, but hear me out. There's so many good stacks on this slate. There's just so many good individual plays. There's weather working in Wrigley Field in their favor for bats. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'm not going to go too in-depth about each player because we'll be here for an hour. So I'm going to try to quick hit this. But starting at catcher, we have Willson Contreras at 4,400. Now, the reason I'm going to have a lot of Chicago Cubs players here, or even some Milwaukee guys, is because the wind is projected to be blowing out about 10 to 11, 12 miles per hour straight out to center. And if you guys don't know anything about Wrigley Field, when the wind is blowing out, that is a huge boost for hitters the way the stadium is designed. Now, again, I'm recording this the night prior, so if the weather changes, I apologize. You guys have to keep up on the weather. But as of right now, what I'm looking at, the wind is projected to blow out straight to center over double-digit miles per hour. So that's going to work in the batter's favors, and as long as that's the case, I like all the Cubs here. Willson Contreras. Now, the matchup versus Freddie Peralta is not like something I absolutely love. He does have a pretty high strikeout rate, 28.26% versus righties and 32.89% versus lefties. But this is mostly just due to the wind here. So, again, just pretty much a weather play. Freddie Peralta is not someone I typically like stacking against. But he does give up a 246 ISO versus righties. So, I think Contreras is fine here. It's not my most favorite matchup in the world, but this is pretty much just all about the wind blowing out. Then we have Christian Vasquez. He's 4,300, and the Red Sox are, again, one of the best stacks on this slate. I mean, pretty much anyone who's playing the Orioles is going to be one of the top stacks on this slate, but Boston's got tons of good hitters, and they are underpriced. I mean, JD Martinez is priced up, but everybody besides JD you can get for pretty much a bargain. They're all priced down. I mean, Xander Bogaerts is expensive, so is Vasquez, but they're not expensive as they could be. And they're going up against a lefty in Wade LeBlanc. He does not throw heat or anything. I mean, I think they should be able to tee off, and we know how awful that Orioles bullpen is, so I think Boston should have a field day. Now, they let us down versus Alex Cobb yesterday, but I'm willing to go right back to the well here. I mean, it just makes no sense to not want to play these guys unless you're trying to get different in tournaments. If you're playing cash games, you pretty much have to lock as many Red Sox as you can because there's a couple of guys that are just way too cheap. But yeah, Christian Vasquez, he hits lefties pretty well, 272 ISO, 124 WRC+. If you're looking at LeBlanc's numbers, he's not that great versus either side of the plate. He actually has a lower strikeout rate versus righties at 15.37%, 220 ISO. I mean, it's a pretty good matchup for Boston here, no matter who's up to the plate. So, do like Vasquez. And Victor Caratini, he's 2,900. And again, this is just due to the wind blowing out in Wrigley. He's only 2,900. He's going to be hitting near the bottom of the order, but again, he's cheap. And if the wind is indeed blowing out like it is, all these guys in this game should be at least in consideration. Same with Anthony Rizzo. He's 5,000, and it's going to sound like a broken record, but the wind's supposed to be blowing out, so they should be decent plays. Again, keep up on the weather tomorrow. I am recording this the night prior, but Anthony Rizzo, he's facing a righty. I mean, he's got great numbers versus righties. 150 WRC plus over a 4.6, or not over a 4.16, exactly 4.16 on base percentage, over a 400 WOBA, 240 ISO. I like Anthony Rizzo. He's just very, very expensive, so I'm probably only using him in stacks. I don't know if I'd really use him as a one-off, but if I'm stacking Cubs, he's obviously a good option. Now, Carlos Santana, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I'm not sure who's pitching for the Royals. I've seen multiple sites list different guys, and a lot of sites have just a to be announced right there, so I have no idea. Originally, it was supposed to be Mike Montgomery, and now it's not. That's kind of up in the air. I've seen some other sites say Jorge Lopez. I'd actually kind of prefer if it was Lopez because the Indians hit right-handed pitching better overall. I mean, the switch hitters hit right-handed pitching much better. Santana, Lindor, Ramirez, they're better versus righties, but it's not like they're terrible versus lefties. I just prefer them versus righties. But even if it is Mike Montgomery, I mean, they should be able to hit him. The bullpen for the Royals isn't that great either. So anyone for the Indians is fine to me. And they actually got priced down pretty much besides Jose Ramirez. So 4,100 for Carlos Santana should be the cleanup hitter here. He's fine. Again, he's better versus, I mean, most of the switch hitters for the Indians are better versus right-handed pitching. But Santana, for the most part, still has some pretty good numbers versus lefties. A 428 on base percentage, 153 WRC plus, a near 330 batting average, numbers are pretty good. He's got a little bit more power versus righties, but I still like Santana here, hitting right in the heart of the order. And once the Vegas totals come out for the Indians game, I expect that to be one of the higher ones on the slate. Then we have Joey Votto. Like I said earlier with Trevor Bauer, I think Cincy is actually one of the best value stacks in the entire slate. Like, they are all extremely, extremely cheap. I think the highest price guy might be Nick Castellanos at 4,500. I'll have to double check that, but let me check that really quick. Pretty sure it is. But anyway, Joey Votto going up against Spencer Turnbull, and Detroit doesn't have a good bullpen either. If you look at their numbers last season, I believe their xFIP was around 5 last year as a bullpen collectively. Yeah, 4.96, one of the worst in the league, right there with Baltimore at 4.97. But yeah, I'm liking the Reds here. They have a 5.5 implied team total. They're in a hitter's ballpark in Cincy. I mean, I think they all make some pretty good options here. They're just way too cheap. Votto's going to be hitting near the top of the order. You just homered yesterday, whenever you're watching this video. I guess it would be yesterday because I'm not going to post this till tomorrow. But, Votto's obviously got better splits versus right-handed pitching. 110 WRC plus, 195 ISO, 346 WOBA. Spencer Turnbull's numbers are actually pretty similar when it comes to lefties and righties in terms of the power given up. 146 ISO versus lefties, 146 ISO versus righties, but he does have a much lower strikeout percentage versus lefties, and only 18% versus them compared to 26% versus righties. And there's a decent amount of lefties in this lineup for Cincy, so I think they actually make a pretty good stack on this slate. And if you stack Cincy, you can pretty much do whatever you want with pitching for the most part. And there's also a free guy on Cincy that we'll talk about at the very end of this video as well. Then going down to Justin Smoak, he's 3,700, and again, he is in the Chicago game, which is supposed to have wind blowing out. And Tyler Chatwood does not scare me in the slightest. Justin Smoak is projected to be batting cleanup here, and if you're looking at Smoak's numbers versus right-handed pitching, he has a 234 ISO, 108 WRC plus, and I just think he's actually a pretty safe option here at 3,700. And again, if you want pieces from this game with the wind blowing out, I think Justin Smoak at 3,700 on a Milwaukee team that definitely's got some firepower does make some sense here. Then we have Michael Chavis at 2,900. He's probably going to end up being very high owned. Now, there's a lot of good options at first base, so I'm not sure exactly how I own, but the Red Sox are arguably the top option on the entire slate, and a lot of these guys are coming in dirt cheap. We have Jose Peraza at 2,700. We have some other cheap guys as well, but 2,900 for a guy that hits lefties very well. He just makes way too much sense here. He's a 255 ISO versus left-handed pitching. 85 WRC plus. I mean, the numbers aren't great for Chavis, but he's 2,900. He's going to be hitting on a great offense. So 6.23 implied team total, which I believe is the highest on the slate so far. So yeah, Michael Chavis at 2,900. Just, it's kind of a freebie, for being honest. So going down to second base, we have Jose Altuve. He's 5,000. He's very expensive. I do not really love using the Astro guys as one-offs for the most part that are super expensive. But if you're stacking the Astros, you obviously can't leave off Jose Altuve. And, I mean, he's going up against Kikuchi, who's just not that great of a pitcher. And if you're looking at Altuve's splits versus lefties, he's got 346 ISO, 176 WRC plus, over a 670 slugging. And if you're looking at Kikuchi's numbers versus right-handed pitching, sorry, I lost my spot for a second. Or not versus right-handed pitching, versus right-handed batters. He's giving up a near 400 WOBA, 241 ISO, only a 15% strikeout rate. The Astros don't strike out much at all as it is. I actually think they have the lowest strikeout rate in the league versus left-handed pitching. So they should be able to make a ton of contact here, and I think they can score a lot of runs. And Jose Altuve obviously would be one of the main parts of that. So he's expensive, but I do like him. And we have Keston Hiura, who's in that game with the wind projected to be blowing out, and he's actually very, very good versus right-handed pitching. If we're going to look at his splits, he's only got a 120 ISO versus lefties, but if we look at his numbers versus righties, he has a 314 ISO, over a 400 WOBA, and near 160 WRC plus. So he's reverse splitsy, and I think he's an excellent option here. I don't know if he's going to go overlooked just because I feel like a lot of people aren't going to want to play Keston Hiura. There's also some really good cheap second base options, but I do think he's fine, especially if you want to stack that game up with the projected weather. Eric Sogard, same team, same game. You guys get the idea. Lefty versus Chatwood. Looking at his numbers versus righties, he's actually a better hitter versus lefties, but he should be batting cleanup. And again, Tyler Chatwood does not scare me in the slightest. So if you want pieces from this game, I do think Eric Sogard is fine. Colton Wong, a guy I've been, I think, recommending every slate so far, if not close. Well, we've only had 2 slates, but he's either been in 2 of these videos or 3. But either way, I still think he's a pretty fine option here versus Mitch Keller. Now, Keller did have actually a pretty respectable strikeout rate if we're looking at his numbers last season. Let's just go over to the splits. he had a 26.21% strikeout rate versus lefties and a 30% strikeout rate versus righties. But he did give up a 400 WOBA to lefties and a near 200 ISO. So I do think Kolten Wong's fine here. He's a high contact hitter. He's going to be leading off, and I think he's fine. Cesar Hernandez, he's 3,600. I am not sure who is pitching for the Royals. I'm preferring it's going to be Lopez. And if it is, that's going to boost Cesar Hernandez even more because he's much better versus right-handed pitching. Because if we're going to look at his splits versus lefties and righties, if it's Mike Montgomery, I'll still have interest just because I like the Indians and they should be able to hit well off their bullpen as long as they get to Montgomery early. But his numbers versus lefties suck. 0.07 ISO, 277 WOBA, 67 WRC plus. Those are pretty bad numbers, but if you look at his numbers versus righties, they get a little bit better. He's not like an elite hitter or anything, but the splits get much better. 152 ISO, 330 WOBA, 102 WRC plus. If you want to stack the ends on this slate, he's really cheap. He fits nicely into your lineup, so I don't mind Cesar Hernandez, even if he is facing a lefty, but I would prefer if it's a guy like Jorge Lopez, but I have no idea who's pitching yet. But I do think it's going to be one of those guys, but neither one really scares me. Then Jose Peraza, he's 2,700. I think he's going to end up being very high owned. He's eligible at second base and shortstop, which also is going to boost his ownership because you can put him in multiple spots. Not in the same lineup, obviously, but you know what I mean. And he's 2,700, and again, everyone's going to want pieces from Boston. You get the righty on lefty matchup here over a 6 implied team total for the Boston Red Sox. Arguably the top stack on the slate. I mean, they just make way too much sense. They're really easy to fit in, and Peraza, he had a great opening day, and I mean, he didn't really do much neither did any of the Red Sox for the most part, but I like them in a bounce back spot here versus Wade LeBlanc. Going down to third base, if you want to spend all the way up, you have Rafael Devers at 5,200. I wish he was 2,700, 5,200, and I already showed you guys a bunch of value options, so really spending up for the guys you want to spend up should not be an issue here, and if you want to make Devers your spend up guy, I have no problem with that. People are probably going to stay away from Devers because it's a lefty on lefty matchup, and people absolutely hate playing lefties on lefties, but he's going to be fine. Now, he obviously has much better splits versus righties, but I am not too scared of Wade LeBlanc here or that bullpen at all. If you're looking at LeBlanc's numbers, splits versus lefties and righties, he's actually giving up more power to lefties than he is righties with a 319 ISO versus left-handed pitching. He also has a higher strikeout rate versus lefties, but I mean, I'm not really scared of anybody the Orioles are going to throw out at the Red Sox. So if you want to full stack them, I totally understand that. Going down to Alex Bregman, he's one of the best hitters in the league versus left-handed pitching. If you want to go to his splits here, you're going to see dark green bars because his numbers versus lefties were absolutely elite last year. A near 400 ISO, a near 500 WOBA, over a 200 WRC plus. He's good versus righties too, but he absolutely mashes lefties, and the Astros are one of the top offenses on the slate. I could show you Kikuchi's numbers, but you guys get the idea. He's not that great of a pitcher, especially versus lefties. Going down to Jose Ramirez, he's 5,000. Again, if you're stacking Indians, obviously you're not really that smart to leave off one of their best hitters in Jose Ramirez. Now, again, he has better splits versus right-handed pitching than he does lefties, but I am not sure who's pitching yet. It might be Montgomery, it might be Lopez, it might not be either one, but either way, I'm not too scared whoever they throw out, but as of right now, I think the most likely candidates will be Lopez or Montgomery, but either way, like the Indians, they should have one of the highest team totals on the slate. Then we have Eugenio Suarez at 4,500. I think a lot of people would rather play Mike Mustakas, so I do have Suarez here as a GPP option because Spencer Turnbull does have a much higher strikeout rate versus righties than he does lefties. But if you're looking at Suarez's numbers last year, he was a lefty smasher, but he was also a righty smasher too. Now, his numbers versus lefties were great, but if you're looking at his numbers versus righties, he had a slightly higher ISO, 0.01, but 3.02 ISO versus right-handed pitching, 128 WRC plus. His numbers were fantastic. So if you're stacking the Reds, I am not scared of the righty matchup there, and I think he's just going to be lower owned because of that. So I don't mind just going 1 through 4 for the Reds. I mean, they are very, very cheap. And speaking of Reds, you have Mike Mustakas here. He comes in at 4,000, and you get that lefty on righty matchup, which I do prefer the lefties versus Turnbull. Now, obviously, Mike Mustakas is a great hitter versus right-handed pitching. He's pretty good versus lefties too, but either way, he's going to be fine. And he actually has a better WRC plus versus lefties, but his numbers still check out. 264 ISO versus righties, and this is obviously a hitter's park. And the Reds are one of the best value stacks in my opinion, and only at 4,000 for Mike Mustakas with a guy with a ton of power. I think he definitely makes some sense. You have Matt Carpenter here going up against Mitch Keller. Pretty much exactly what I talked about with Kolten Wong. Now, the thing I don't like about Carpenter is that he tends to strike out a lot. He has a 24% strikeout rate versus lefties, and a 26% strikeout rate versus righties. And Mitch Keller also has a pretty decent high strikeout rate versus lefties and righties. So that does give me some concern, but I do prefer the left-handed bats versus Mitch Keller. And obviously Matt Carpenter qualifies, and I like his price tag, so I think he's a fine option. And if you want to completely punt, you have Colin Moran here. He comes in at 2,900 and going up against a high ground ball pitcher in Dakota Hudson. I mean, like, really high ground ball rate. So if we're looking at his numbers versus lefties and righties, he's got a 50% ground ball rate to lefties and a 64% ground ball rate to righties. But I do want the lefties versus him. I'm not really looking to play many Pirates whatsoever. But if you want a really cheap option of Moran below 3K, he's decent. Hudson did give a 14% walk rate to lefties, which is actually very, very high, and only a 16% strikeout rate versus them as well, and close to a 200 ISO. So I think Moran is fine if you need a value option. Going down to shortstops, we have plenty of good options here. Like, we're absolutely loaded. We have Xander Bogaerts, who I think will probably end up being the chalk here. Again, you're going to want pretty much anybody and everybody that you can versus Wade LeBlanc and the Orioles bullpen. They should be able to just tee off here. Bogaerts has excellent numbers versus lefties. If you look at his splits, 261 ISO, 130 WRC plus. You guys get the idea. Boston is all in play here. Don't really need to go too in depth in there. Then you have Frankie Lindor, 4,500. He's a better hitter versus righties, which I've said multiple times. So I'm not sure who's pitching for KC. I have Mike Montgomery in here currently, but not sure. Either way, I still like the Indians. They should have one of the highest totals on the slate. Carlos Correa, he's 4,400. You guys get the idea by now. I like the righties versus Kikuchi. I also like Brantley, who I will talk about, but I mean, for the most part, the righties should be able to tee off versus Kikuchi. Not too concerned about them there. Should be one of the top offenses on the slate. They have a near 6 implied team total. Then you got Javi Baez going up against Freddie Peralta. Again, don't love using guys versus Peralta, but he did give up more power to the righties, like I said earlier. But if you guys did forget, or if you skipped, if you're looking at Peralta's numbers versus righties, he gave up a 125 ISO versus lefties, but a 246 ISO versus righties. And again, the wind's going to be blowing out, projected to, and Baez has got good numbers all around. So I think Baez is fine. You also get him at 4,100, which I think is a pretty good price point. Then Jorge Polanco, he comes in at 4K. And if you guys were on the channel last year, I played the Twins pretty much every single time they were facing a righty for the most part. Obviously, I played different guys when they were facing lefties like Nelson Cruz, CJ Cron, and what's his name? Mitch Garver and a couple of other guys. But I mean, they hit bombs all season long last year. I mean, they were just hitting home runs left and right. And Jorge Polanco, he's not a huge home run hitter, but he was one of the safest bets pretty much almost every slate. And I think Minnesota gets overlooked on this slate because you got Boston, you got the Reds, which make good value stacks. You're going to potentially have the Indians, then you have the Astros, and then you have the weather game in Chicago with the wind blowing out projected too. So I could see the Twins going overlooked, and I actually think they make excellent options versus Reynaldo Lopez here. I mean, the Twins just teed off versus righties. They teed off versus lefties, but I like Polanco here, and he's a much better hitter versus righties. And if you're looking at his splits, he's got over a 200 ISO, 133 WRC plus, 372 WOBA. And if you're looking at Lopez's splits versus left-handed bats last year, he gave up over a 200 ISO, only an 18% strikeout rate, 360 WOBA. WOBA. So I think Polanco's an excellent option. He's pretty cheap at 4K, and I actually do not mind stacking up the Twins. I think they could definitely do some damage versus Lopez. So I do like Polanco, and I do think they could go overlooked, so I guess they're more of a sneaky stack on this slate. I'm not sure if they'll be sneaky. Again, I'm making this the night prior, so I'm not sure, but I just feel like they're going to be a lower owned stack than the rest of the bunch. Then you get Didi Gregorius, who's been hot. He has 2 home runs in 2 games so far this year, and I told you guys, do not be scared of the lefty-on-lefty matchup for Didi, and what do you know, he went deep. But now he's facing a righty where he does have worse splits against, but I'm really not that concerned. This is mostly because of the price, because I do like him, and there wasn't really many cheap shortstops I liked other than Jose Peraza, who is also shortstop eligible. But I don't mind Didi here, even though he does have better splits versus lefties. But I like the price, and he's hot currently. I know he only has 2 games, but he is hot, 2 homers, so I do like Didi. Now we're going to the outfield, which is absolutely loaded on this slate. So we're going to start with Christian Yelich here at 5,600, and this is just due to the wind blowing out. And the simple fact, he is one of the best hitters in the entire league. I mean, the numbers are not going to look bad for Christian Yelich no matter which way you split it, and especially if you're looking versus right-handed pitching. I mean, the guy's got a near 200 ISO, over a 700 slugging, a near a 400 ISO, especially with the wind blowing out. I think Christian Yelich is obviously one of the top projected players on the entire slate. Is he one of the best values on the slate? No, but there's plenty of value on the slate if you want to spend up for Yelich. George Springer, not really like looking to one-off him, but if you're stacking the Astros, he's going to be leading off, and he's great versus left-handed pitching. If you're going to look at his splits, my computer reload, he has over a 230 ISO, 144 WRC plus. Actually had more power versus righties last season, but either way, Astros smash lefties. And probably the best play on the entire slate, 5,000. If you're spending up in the outfield, this is my preferred guy because anytime JD Martinez is facing a lefty, it's hard to fade the guy. The numbers are just, they're too good. They're way too good. They're almost unbelievable, to be honest. But dark green bars all around here, 242 WRC plus. If you thought Bregman's numbers were good versus lefties, JD Martinez is kind of just puts those in the dust. I mean, he almost has almost 100 points better in the ISO department. I mean, the numbers are just crazy for JD versus lefties. But yeah, 242 ISO or 242 WRC plus, 539 WOBA, 482 ISO. I mean, the numbers are just too good. Over a 400 batting average. Going up against Wade LeBlanc. I think he has 2 homers off of Wade LeBlanc in his career too, for those of you guys who like BVP. So yeah, JD Martinez, top play in the entire slate for me for the bats. Then you have Nelson Cruz. I always play him versus lefties. People tend to just get off him a little bit when it comes to the righties, but I still think he's going to be fine. He has plenty of power versus right-handed pitching. 283 ISO, 401 WOBA, 153 WRC plus, over a 300 batting average versus them. If you're stacking the Twins, not really smart to leave off Nelson Cruz, who obviously can go double dong at any moment. So yeah, I like Nelson Cruz. Eddie Rosario, again, if you're stacking the Twins, I played Eddie Rosario a ton last season. He's only 4,300, and this is a pretty good matchup versus Lopez here. Again, he's giving up a decent amount of power to lefties, and versus right-handed pitching last season, Rosario had a near 250 ISO, 105 WRC plus. If you're stacking Twins, I do like Rosario. Kyle Schwarber should be batting cleanup. He did homer last night, or not really, it wasn't nighttime, was it? Last afternoon, I should say. But yeah, he's cheap. He should be hitting cleanup, and with the wind blowing out, I think he makes a good option here. He's got a near 300 ISO versus righties, 127 WRC plus. The problem is Freddie Peralta's not a guy I love using against. He actually did give up lower power to lefties, but kind of minimizes it if the wind is indeed blowing out. So I do like Schwarber. Max Kepler, you guys know, if you were on the channel last year, I pretty much recommended Max Kepler every single slate, and the dude just absolutely slayed for us. And I believe in his first at-bat this season, he did homer. So yes, I do like Max Kepler here. He's only 4,100. He's probably going to grade out pretty well in the value department of my projections. And look, I love playing Max Kepler, and he's just way too cheap at 4,100. I mean, at some points last season, he was almost 5,500. So we're getting a good price on him, and the Twins absolutely teed off versus righties and lefties last season, and I think they can do damage on this slate. And if they go overlooked, I really like them in tournaments. But if you're looking at Kepler's numbers versus righties last year, he had a 281 ISO, 350 WOBA, 118 WRC plus, and he's a good option in my opinion. And a couple of Indians guys here in Franmil Reyes. He's 4,100. He actually has more power versus righties, but I'm not sure who is going to pitch. If it's Mike Montgomery, I still like him. If it's Lopez, I still like him. So just keep him on your radar, especially for Indian stacks. Jordan Luplow. Only like Luplow if Montgomery's in, because Luplow versus lefties are almost like JD Martinez type numbers. Not quite there, but pretty close to it if we're being honest. He has a near 200 ISO versus them, 422 ISO. I think I said near 200 ISO. I meant 200 WRC plus, 422 ISO, near 500 WOBA, 700 slugging, a 320 batting average versus them. If Luplow sees a lefty, I think he's an excellent play, especially at 3,900. Would make a good piece to an Indian stack. Going on to another Boston Red Sox and Andrew Benintendi. He's 3,600. His price is just getting way too low now. He has been absolutely awful to start the season. He still scored some points for us on opening day, but yesterday, I mean, he looked rough, and he had a matchup versus a righty too. Just could not get the job done. But look, I am not going to leave the guy leading off for the Red Sox off my stacks. I mean, I still think he's fine in cash games, especially at this price, especially if you're leading off for the Red Sox, because I don't really think Wade LeBlanc's going to last too long, and he's going to see righties at some point. So Benintendi makes too much sense here. 3,600, he's way too cheap, and LeBlanc actually did give up more power to lefties last season. If you look at his splits, 250 ISO. I'm sorry, that was Mike Montgomery. 319 ISO, 370 WOBA. So I like pretty much everybody for the Red Sox here. Kevin Kevin Pillar, he should have a decent spot in the order. He performed very well on opening day for us versus the lefty, and I'm not sure if he's going to score near 20 points again, but I still think he's a fine option versus Wade LeBlanc. If you're looking at his splits versus lefties last year, he had a 241 ISO, 105 WRC+, obviously much better splits versus lefties. So I think Pillar's fine. Again, if you're stacking the Red Sox, he's cheap, and it's very, very easy to stack the Red Sox on this slate. It's like, it's too easy, to be honest. It needs to be a lot harder than this. I mean, you can do whatever you want on this slate, to be honest. And then go down to Jesse Winker. He should be leading off versus the righty in Cincy. And again, like I said, I prefer the lefties versus Spencer Turnbull, and I like the Cincy stack tonight. Not tonight, today. But yeah, he's going to be fine. And Michael Brantley, he's 3,300, and this is a really, really cheap price per game with Brantley. I usually say whenever he's in that mid 4K range, he's always going to make this sheet, because I just like playing Michael Brantley. He's one of the most consistent hitters in the league. Now, I don't like him usually as much in lefty-on-lefty matchups, but I think people are just going to skip over him. And if you're stacking the Astros, he's going to be hitting cleanup, and he's only 3,300, and I'm not too concerned about it. He's facing a lefty on opening day, and he still got a homer at one point. So 3,300, you're getting a bargain for Michael Brantley on one of the best offenses in the league, and he's hitting right in the heart of that order. Obviously, his splits versus lefties aren't as good as they are versus righties, but still good numbers nonetheless. And then at the very bottom, we have an absolute free player that fits on your Cincy stacks. And like I said, guys, there's so much value on this slate. You can do whatever the heck you want. But yeah, Shogo Akiyama is just absolutely free here. And Cincy is just one of the best value stacks in the entire slate. And it's kind of like where Yoshi yesterday, where he ended up hitting cleanup and he was 2,000 and he didn't do anything, but still, he was absolutely free and the potential's there. I like the Cincy offense, and if you want to just complete punt, I think Shogo's just fine. So that's pretty much going to be all the guys I want to talk about. Longer video than usual, but there's a lot to talk about in the slate. I think this is a very, very fun slate. You can do you can go a lot of different ways. I mean, you can stack the Indians, you can stack the Red Sox, you can stack the Twins, the Reds, the Astros. I mean, there's just a lot of ways you can go on this slate, and I am looking forward to it. And you also have the win game in Wrigley as well, so a lot to look forward to. Again, apologize if anything drastic changes on this slate, but I did record this video prior just so I get the video out in a timely manner for you guys so more people could watch it. But do appreciate you guys watching. Hope you enjoyed the games, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And if you didn't already, leave a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff, you know, Patreon. You get it, right? Okay. See you guys in the next video.